Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we rank every politician to tell you who's winning and losing each week. This week I'm joined by Rory.
Hello.
And Zach.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Full of energy, I think, is how I would describe it.
Would you?
Yeah.
We're off the back of quite a long meeting.
A real incongruence between the words and the tone.
I don't buy that one bit.
I thought if I said it, it would sort of will it into
Manifest
existence.
it.
But yeah,
I don't know if it has. We'll see. By the end of the episode, we'll tell.
Gave me a cheer, to be fair.
yeah.
Okay, the leaderboard currently stands like this. This is our ranking of a whole bunch of world leaders based on their own priorities and their own objectives, not based on how much we like them, assessing week by week who's doing well and who's doing badly. In today's episode, we'll be moving 2 people up on the board, 2 people down on the board, and we'll be adding someone new based on your suggestions last episode. We're going to start with losers this week, though, so let's get into it. Zach, we're going to start with you. Who is your loser this week?
My loser of the week is Argentina's president, Javier Milei. He's normally having a pretty good time. He's pretty high up the board, but the last couple of weeks have been undeniably tough for him. I think the sort of proximate cause of all this comes a couple of weeks ago when local media essentially leaked these recordings that purported to be from the sort of head of the disability aid agency in Argentina, talking to what looks like an undercover reporter and basically accusing Javier Milei's sister, who's sort of one of his very close political confidants, of skimming 3% of every contract that goes to a particular aid provider in Argentina. And according to the recording, that nets her about $500,000 every month, which is pretty good going. Wow. That obviously, it would be bad news for any politician, but it's especially bad news for Milei because it's a sort of old school corruption scandal, right? There was a cryptocurrency related scandal a while ago, which you might remember seeing. We did a video on it, but that never really got that much purchase in Argentina. I think because it's a bit, if you're not into crypto, you're not really going to care. And also it doesn't really affect that many people, right? No. The people who got burned were sort of whole mishmash of Milei Twitter followers, right? And some of them are in Argentina, but I think the estimates were only about 40,000 people lost some money and not that much money. And that's only a few thousand Argentinians probably. Not trying to trivialize it, but I'm just saying that doesn't have the sort of it's not going to get the political traction that these sort of scandals will do, right? Because it's it's a classic. It's skimming money. It's also
from aid agencies,
from a disability aid agency. That's a terrible look, and it looks like old school corruption, which is exactly what Milei railed against. Right? He spent his campaign in 2023 basically saying the Argentinian political establishment are corrupt. One of the reasons that you're poor is that they've got this massively bloated government, and they're all skimming bits off the top of it at the taxpayers' expense. And I think there's 2 other reasons that it's really not good for me. Maybe 3. The first is that he's just mishandled it so far, right? So originally, both him and the director of the aid agency said, no, it's not my voice on that. And then they said, okay, no, fine, it is. And then everyone said, well, you should fire your sister. And I think to sort of understand this, you have to understand that Milei doesn't really have he's not an establishment politician, right? So he doesn't have that network of advisors that, I don't know, someone like Tony Blair would have, right? So he sort of has to lean quite heavily.
The obvious example.
Of course. I mean, I'm always thinking about Tony. He doesn't have to sort of rely quite heavily on some more unorthodox, basically the few people he knows will be loyal to him. Yeah, right. And he's very, very close to his sister. And he's basically said he's not going to get rid of her, that she's staying in a circle. I think that's just a bit of a problem for him, right? He doesn't have anyone to replace her with, but obviously she's become a political liability for him. And then I think and I do think this is probably the most fundamental issue for Milei here, is that this interacts sort of quite badly with his economic project. And it's something we talked about in the video that we did in this video, but I think the video on this topic, but I think it can't really be overstated that so much of Milei's economic reforms rely on momentum. He has done a lot to basically try and attract foreign investment into the country. And in the best case scenario, that foreign investment sort of supercharges the recovery because, again, it's worth noting that because of those steep cuts to government spending, Argentina did suffer a very steep recession in 2024. And his ideal outcome, he was always talking about a V-shaped recovery, right? Remember that from the COVID pandemic. He was always talking about how that was going to be a V-shaped recovery and there's going to be a quick contraction and then all the money was going to come flowing in and Argentina was going to shoot out. And in this best case scenario, that you get this great feedback loop, right? Where the money pours in, that makes the economy grow. Milei gets more popular. Investors become more confident his reforms are going to stick, right? Because he's popular, he's going to get re-elected. And the more and more money comes in because investors aren't worried that he's going to be replaced by some sort of spendthrift Peronist and a little bit after, a little bit later. But the risk is that this sort of thing tips him in the opposite direction, right? Where investment doesn't come in because investors are worried that actually Millei's not that popular. He probably will have to make more concessions to Congress. He probably won't get a big majority at the upcoming midterms. He'll probably be sort of scuppered by the political establishment in Argentina, right? And that means that the economic recovery stalls, Millei's popularity goes down, investors become even nervier. You see what I mean? You enter that sort of vicious cycle as opposed to the virtuous cycle that Milei was probably imagining to begin with. And I think it's one of the, I think Milei has been undeniably incredibly successful in stabilizing the Argentinian economy in lots of ways. He has done, incredible work basically cutting both the fiscal and trade budgets, right? The Argentinian government no longer spends more than it takes in. And Argentina doesn't import more than it exports, which is something that used to be a chronic problem, right? But one of the slightly sort of weaker points of his presidency so far has been that actually he has really struggled to attract as much investment as he clearly wanted. He's had some sort of very eye-catching big policies offering very, very generous tax and sort of regulatory incentives for big businesses to invest in Argentina. And this isn't really his fault. I mean, it's mainly a consequence of the fact that, there is still this sort of massive backlog of complicated regulations and taxes that he's yet to fully cut through that make it less attractive to invest in Argentina. But actually, foreign investment has been pretty weak since he came in by most measures. It's quite hard to measure, but by most measures it has been pretty weak. And I think that has stunted the recovery, right? So the month-on-month GDP readings have actually been pretty weak in the last couple of months. Basically, the recovery is sort of stalled. And so, I think that the risk for Milei is that he does get stuck in that vicious cycle. The silver lining, again, as we mentioned in the video, is that actually he's still more popular than the opposition, which is, really all over the place at the moment and widely discredited. I think in a way you can sort of draw an analogy to Trump in the US. I think actually for all their apparent sort of affection towards one another, Milei and Trump are very different politicians. I mean, most obviously Milei actually is a sort of old school free marketeer, whereas Trump might talk that sort of rhetoric, but in policy terms, he's very, very protectionist and, he's running an enormous budget deficit, for instance, not very Milei-like at all. But I think they're actually quite similar in that they are quite charismatic right-wing politicians who make it very hard for the opposition, right? Yeah. In that, Milei and Trump have both sort of monopolized the right in lots of ways. And because they're still sort of anti-establishment vibes, the left isn't really sure how to play it. Do you see what I mean, right? And that's as true in Argentina as it is in the US. The sort of traditional left-wing opposition, the Peronists, are sort of at 6 and 7s. They don't really know how to respond to Milei.
Okay.
Sorry, so that's the silver lining for him, in that he's still ahead in the polls of the opposition. But the most recent polling actually does suggest that the Peronists have gained quite a few points on him.
Yeah, and things are definitely moving in the wrong direction for him at the moment. Yeah. Milei then moving down on the board from the positive section to the lightly positive section, a very crowded tier there. Still on the top half of the board, still doing pretty well, as you say. There are still some silver linings in there, but shifting downward, which is a very different trajectory from the one he was on only a few months ago. Thank you for that. That was quite a lot of info. So I'm going to politely move on, Zach. And I'm going to move on to Rory's loser of the week. Who is your loser this week, Rory?
So my loser of the week is Paetongtarn Shinawatra, who is no longer the Prime Minister of Thailand. So not only is she loser of the week, she's being axed from the board, which is very exciting.
She had an axe hanging over her head already. We said as soon as she goes, she's gone. And as you said, as you're about to tell us, she has gone. She has gone.
Last Friday, the Constitutional Court removed her from office, saying that she committed an ethics violation as part of this sort of now infamous leaked phone call that she had with the Cambodian sort of de facto leader, where she was a bit deferential to him and criticized the Thai military. And that caused a lot of sort of backlash among especially conservative circles in Thailand. They complained to the Constitutional Court, and now she's gone. I could go on about Thai politics for ages because I think it's so interesting, very dramatic. But
it's just not like other guys.
But so she comes from a very powerful political family, the Shinawatra family. But that family's had a massive downfall, and looks like sort of maybe the final nail in the coffin, because so she's the 6th prime minister, either from that family or backed by that family, to be removed from office in the last 20 years, either by a military coup or by a judicial decision. So they've had a long...
Not good numbers.
Is she related to Thaksin?
Yeah, she's his daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's been a multi-decade sort of battle between Thaksin Shinawatre's family and his political project against the sort of conservative military establishment. The interesting thing is that this leaves Thailand in a very open position in that it needs a new government, and there's basically two options, or there were basically two options. One was a minority government led by her replacement from her party. The party's called Pheu Thai, and the other is a conservative party called Bum Jai Thai, which could lead another minority government. But either one would need the support of the People's Party, which is this big progressive sort of reformist movement, and that just became the kingmaker, having been sort of shunned by the mainstream political parties for the last few years. It suddenly came into this position where it was deciding who would be the next prime minister. And they decided to say, look, we're not going to join any coalition, but we will support any party to, make their person prime minister if they commit to dissolving parliament so we can have an election within 4 months. And both of the main parties, Pheu Thai and Bum Jai Thai, said, yes, we'll do that, clearly desperate to try and lead the next government. So the People's Party left a very difficult decision to choose between these two parties. One is more ideologically similar, but they are seen as sort of traitors to the People's Party movement. And the other is just a conservative party that is the complete opposite to what the People's Party believes. Then dramatically, the People's Party said, right, we're going to back Bum Jai Thai, the Conservative Party. We disagree with them on everything, but we sort of trust them more than these other guys who betrayed us. We trust them more to hold an election within 4 months. And then the acting prime minister, who's from Pheu Thai, he said, right, we're going to not let that happen. I'm just going to dissolve parliament anyway, and we're going to have an election as soon as possible. So yes, chaos. I wrote well, by the time this comes out, maybe the videos come out. But I was trying to write that over the course of a few days, and every day something would change, and it just got crazier and crazier. And yeah, Thailand heading for an election that could go in so many different directions, I think.
Heading to an election that won't include Paetongtarn Shinawatra, though.
Yes.
So
yeah,
she is being removed. Well, she'll be all right.
She'll be all right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. She is falling off the board. A rare removal. We occasionally do purge episodes where we go through a lot of people and remove them. I think I've been hearing whispers. The purge alarm is starting to ring.
Really?
There might be another purge coming. But for the moment, Paetongtarn Shinawatra is the only one being purged because, as you say, she's no longer a world leader. The upcoming elections, obviously difficult to predict what will happen, as you say. But do you think, regardless of who wins, that this will be a kind of real change for Thailand? As you say, we're in a decades-long process of various kind of like one family controlled politicians being slipped in, and daughters and siblings and whatever, and going through like this dynasty. Regardless of who wins, do you think this is a big change for Thailand and we're going to move beyond that? Or do you think there's a risk that they slip back into it?
I think we can fairly confidently say that the People's Party will win. Polling suggests they have a very strong lead. Their predecessor party, called Move Forward, won the last election. They're very popular, but they are deeply disliked by the establishment that has done all in their power to stop them actually forming a government. If they win again, the question is, are they able to form a government, or does the establishment use some form, whether it's just like sort of through the courts or political pressure and protest, or is it an outright military coup? And I think a lot of countries, when we talk about the potential for coups, it does sound a bit alarmist, but Thailand is so incredibly coup prone. They had one in 2006 and then one in 2014. I think they've had like a dozen since sort of the modern state of Thailand came to be. And it's just sort of talked about as like, in the news, it's like the military will say, oh no, we're not going to do a coup. And then that politician will say, well, there is a risk of a coup. It's just weird to have that in the political discourse. So it is a real genuine threat. But yeah, the election probably will result in a victory for People's Party, but we just don't know what,
I suppose, as you say,
comes from there.
Political system so different from the ones we're maybe used to ultimately the winner of the election is not the important thing. Like, they will likely move beyond this kind of dynasty politics electorally, but whether the powers that be in the country allow that change to actually take force is like a different question.
Yeah. This is one to watch.
And a tiny bit of Travis. You don't have to keep this in if you don't want to.
Go
but
on.
The only reason, Thaksin Shinawatra, I know him from politics, but also because he used to be the chairman of Man City, and people couldn't pronounce his name, so they all called him Dave.
That's so like
He's that okay?
English,
So
isn't it?
English.
It's
Yeah,
not
it is.
okay.
That's
Yeah.
I don't know if that.
It's
is
also
okay.
not that difficult. It's like
Thaksin.
yeah.
But
And you know what? It's like really not many syllables, but
Even Shinawatra you don't need to get right. If you're going with Dave, for limiting to just first name, Thaksin's not difficult.
yeah.
Come on. Well,
I'm not. That's not
glad-
me.
I'm glad.
I wasn't a
Sorry.
Man City fan in 2006. I was like
fine.
8.
I'm just glad you didn't say he's like friends with your dad or something. That's what I was ready to hear. Like
Cut
some
that
kind
out.
of familial.
Cut that, Scarlett.
connection.
Cut that nonsense out.
No, keep it in.
I'm
Okay, let's move on to the audience suggestion. Okay, so every week we let you, the audience, select one person who's either added to the board or moved on the board based on your comments on the previous episode. This week, you've chosen Singapore's Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong. Prime Minister? President?
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Should have backed myself. Who wants to go first? We need to come to a decision. Lawrence Wong is being added to the board. Is he being added to the lightly positive section or the lightly negative section? Is he a winner or is he a loser? Rory?
I think he's a winner. And it's maybe cheating because he's been Prime Minister for I think like a year now, but the party he comes from has been in power for like more than 60 years.
Yeah.
They've got very strong control. So doing it based on that is probably slightly cheating. But Singapore had an election earlier this year, and this was the first election that he, as leader of the ruling party, the People's Action Party, that was his first time leading that party into an election. So it was a big test of his leadership, and they won and increased their vote share and stuff. So he came in on a strong mandate. I think for Singapore now, it's obviously a big trading hub and is a big advocate of free trade and stuff. And that's not necessarily the most fashionable thing these days with Trump sort of running things. But just in research, I stumbled across things saying that Singapore and a few other countries are trying to form this sort of pro-free trade group, which is quite fun. Yeah,
lots of small countries.
Yeah.
New Zealand, the UAE, they're doing a little get-together, protecting free trade.
We should go to that.
I think it's fun, and I also think it will age well. I mean, I'm betraying my pro-free trade bias here, but I mean, I'm not actually massively. I'm not like an ideological free trade guy. I just think Trump's particular form of protectionism is not internationally sustainable in some sense, right? Like I think that like it might be all right for America, but I think it'll make the rest of the world more inclined to free trade reactively.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of bearing the flag of free trade is probably politically quite a savvy move at the moment.
Do you agree, Lawrence Wong a winner?
Yeah, I do. And I actually think, I think, again, I agree with Rory. At first glance, you might assume that Singapore, it's a very, very small country. It relies a lot on imports. I mean, even imports its water, right? But it would be threatened by the apparent decline of free trade. But I think that is true. But I would also say that Singapore is sort of considered a bit of a financy safe haven. Financy safe haven?
That's what you call it.
That's what you call it. That's the word.
Technical term.
Yeah. You have to cut that now.
Assert yourself
You
through
have to.
throat noises.
It's a financially safe haven, sometimes referred to as Switzerland of the East, and there is some tentative evidence that it has benefited from that status, right? So during sort of times of financial tumult, especially when it involves America, international capital is looking for a sort of safe place to park, and Singapore does play that role. So you do see that in certain places. I think most obviously, the Singaporean Stock Exchange, which wasn't very fashionable for the last couple of decades, has seen a sort of surge of new listings. And I also think in lots of ways, Singapore more and more is a bit of a model for lots of Western countries. You saw that a bit in the Brexit debate. Remember, everyone talking about Singapore and sea.
Yeah, true.
And I still think that it still retains a particular allure. I think it's a couple of things. I mean, one, Singapore reliably produces just very competent civil servants and politicians. And I think that's just by virtue of the fact that they pay them so much. But I think that lots of Western political classes, Western elites and actually electorates envy that. And then also Singapore is a sort of bastion of fiscal sustainability and prudence, right? Singapore is an incredibly wealthy country for starters, but It also has incredibly well-managed public finances, and potentially it's sort of got two sovereign wealth funds, despite the fact, by the way, it's not like Saudi Arabia, right? It's not like a massive oil exporter. It's just a financing country. And yet it makes so much money that it has to have these two massive sovereign wealth funds to manage it. And I think that a lot of sort of, again, Western elites look slightly enviously towards Singapore. It's a very rich country with very strong GDP growth, but that has also managed to keep it in very impressive lid on its public finances. I mean, it's not replicable everywhere. So Singapore is obviously like a very particular case. It's a very small country. It sort of sits nicely in between East Asia and the West. Yeah. It's also benefited from the demise of Hong Kong in that respect, right? Which also plays a similar role in finance terms. But yeah, I think that it's both succeeded as a safe haven for nervous capital, but it is also has always had a real allure to Western policymakers, which I think become particularly strong as basically, Western governments are roiled by political turmoil and high levels of debt.
Okay, so Lawrence Wong being added to the board, being added to the lightly positive section because of the arguments made by Zach and Rory. Let us know in the comments if you would have added him there. You can also let us know who you want to see added next time we record. Worth saying that we will be taking a 2-week break from the World Leader Leaderboard because of various internal circumstance with the company. We'll be taking a 2-week break, but we will be back. Ominous. It did. We'll be fine. Everyone will
holidays,
be back.
Basically.
Holidays, basically. Yeah. A variety of holidays that make recording this pretty difficult. So we're taking a 2-week break, but I will say that when we return, we'll be returning with a special announcement, and it's a good thing. So stick around. Let us know in the comments who you want to see added or moved in like 2 weeks' time, and we'll be back moving or adding that person and with an announcement. Speaking of announcements,
what is the announcement?
We've interrupted my segue. Speaking of announcements, we have another announcement today. Well, it was announced in Summergeddon earlier in the week, but you might not watch that. We are re-releasing Brexit the Colouring Book, which is a product that we first created in 2020 during the depths of the pandemic as a crazy fever dream of an idea of what if we made a colouring book that's themed around Brexit. It is 5 years on from that, and we've decided that now is the time to re-release it. It contains 25 hand-drawn images which you're able to colour in, including the ones you're seeing on screen right now. And also, it contains our commentary on the entire Brexit process. Every image has a story, bit of text next to it about the timeline. Each individual photo takes you through the narrative, progressing from the beginning to the end. And then, special for this final definitive edition, we've also added more context on what's happened since we published the first time round. So we've got an extra couple of pages, 4 pages, running through what's happened since 2021, basically, and all of the kind of updates since then. So if you like a silly novelty gift, if you like to collect TLDR things and you didn't get one first time round in 2020, if you weren't a TLDR viewer back then and you want to pick up the definitive edition of Brexit the Colouring Book, it is available on our store right now. And if you use code BREXIT at checkout, you'll get 20% off your purchase. That is for a limited time only. And by the time we're back next time, and we could tell you, that will be over. So make sure you pick up your copy. Also, as a little teaser, we recorded an episode of our behind the scenes podcast, The Bullpen, earlier, where we each coloured in a page. And here's my one of Nigel Farage celebrating Brexit. He was in a pub, as you can tell.
Cool. Generous with that hair colour, I think.
Yeah, I wanted it a little greyer. But
he is slightly timeless, isn't he? He is. I saw a video of him in the European Parliament. He looks so similar.
Yeah. Well, there's a picture of him in the European Parliament in this book, which you could colour in. Maybe you will if you get time. Yeah, I'm sure you'd love it. So, as I say, pick up a copy, toolong.news, head there, or click the link in the description, and use code BREXIT at checkout for 20% off. Okay, let's move on to our winners of the week. Okay, let's jump back over to you, Zach. Who is your winner this week?
My winner of the week is Russian President Vladimir Putin. I think the reason he's a winner this particular week is because on Sunday and Monday he was a very prominent figure at the annual Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin in northern China, and I think this speaks to a sort of broader victory that Putin is currently enjoying, which is that he is definitely not the international pariah that Europe hoped they would turn him into after Putin's invasion of Ukraine all the way back in 2022. Some of this is Trump-related. Obviously, hosting Putin in Alaska, that has definitely rehabilitated him somewhat. I mean, in a way, actually, you can frame what happened in Tianjin as also Trump-related, right? I think that one of the reasons he was welcomed so warmly is because he was seen as a sort of instrumental part of what does look like a sort of anti-Trump alliance, you know, not just Modi, Xi and Putin, but also more widely, you know, there's all those members of Central Asia who are worried about Trump's sort of assault on established international norms. And I think from Putin's perspective, it's been a brilliant year or so in this respect. Even I'd say even 18 months ago, maybe probably before Gaza, I think Gaza helped him in certain respects because I think it made it harder for the West to argue that he was violating international law, which is why the rest of the world should care about it. But yeah, not even that long ago, he really was on the cusp of things, right? He was buddying up to North Korea, which was not a great look. You know, China was sort of an ally, but a tentative ally, not a particular vocal supporter. And now, you know, he's jet setting all over the place, doing cute little photo ops with, you know, Modi and Xi and all his other mates. And the other thing is that Trump's much touted 50-day deadline has passed a couple of days ago without a whimper. And no substantial change in US policy in Ukraine. In fact, the most recent reports suggest that Trump has basically given up. He says he's going to be taking a step back from peace negotiations, which is great. So, you know, from Putin's perspective, it's just wins all around, right? I do think that the sort of formation, the emergence of what does look like a growing anti-Trump bloc has really allowed Putin to rehabilitate himself. And it's also, you saw this at the SCO actually, we talked a lot about how NATO is expanding into sort of, you know, we didn't say Russia's sphere of influence, but you know, NATO actually is a threat. I think that in some sense, you know, especially Trump's assertive posture, if we can describe it in such euphemistic terms, in Central and South America, right, has lent credence to that sort of Putin idea, right, that there are these spheres of influence and that America hides behind the rules-based order, but is actually always sort of asserting its strategic interests, you know? And I think that, Trump's sort of aggression towards countries like Venezuela, you know, has lent credence to that idea and sort of, given Putin a degree of plausibility that I don't think he deserves. I think for Putin, wins all round, really.
Yeah, it does sound like it. Putin is already at the top of the board, has a +1 next to his head. What that means is that already once he's been upvoted when he's already at the very top. So you obviously can't go any higher than the top of the board. So we put those little numbers to indicate that someone has been shuffled up or attempted to shuffle up without any additional space. So in theory, he should be 1 level up already. Obviously, with Zach moving him up this week, that +1 is going to move to a +2, making him the second highest placed person on the board after only Xi, which kind of leads me to my follow-up, which I'm interested to dig a bit deeper into what this kind of anti-Trump alliance means. You've got two kind of winning leaders at the moment, at least by our metric. Modi is lightly negative at the moment on the board, but even still broadly pretty powerful. I mean, India alone as a country lends him enough influence and winning credentials. So Putin obviously is being part of this, but more broadly, like, what does the buddying up of these countries mean, even beyond their respective leaders? This kind of alliance forming, this kind of anti-Trump, anti-West narrative, what do we think that means? Is that anything, or is it a bit like BRICS and other alliances where, sure, it's good for the individuals because they get to buddy up and get some cute photos together, and based on the photos I've seen, they had a merry old time. But does it actually move the needle at all geopolitically or not?
So I think there are two ways to look at this, right? I think that skeptics will say, yes, it's just BRICS all over again, right? SCO is just, it's a sort of ambiguous organization with no obvious purpose. They get together, they do some handshakes, you know, they do some, Putin cracks some jokes, Modi laughs. There was apparently cracked a really good gag. Yeah, he got a big grin out of Modi. But then nothing meaningful happens, right? Like BRICS is the best example of this. You know, despite all of those sort of like headlines you get on all those like edgy politics news websites, nothing ever happens with BRICS, right? Every so often they say like, we're going to create a new oil and gold backed currency to rival the dollar. They love, Putin hates the dollar so much. He's always talking about stuff like that. And then like he'll show like a, you know, like a banknote or something with some convoluted design, and everyone will be like, my goodness, the end of American hegemony. It's a bit like that stuff, you know, talk about the Zangezur corridor. It's got people say like strategic, and it doesn't mean anything. And then nothing happens, and then nothing ever happens. But I would say, you know, other people on the other side of the aisle will say that, I mean, it's a process for starters, right? In defense of BRICS, right? BRICS wasn't even supposed to really be a grouping. It's a term coined by a British economist in the 2000s. And it sort of slowly emerged as like, as a sort of, sometimes people say like a global south alternative to the G7 or the G20. Yeah. And like, again, with the G7 and G20, there's not really an obvious purpose behind them, but they do sort of coordinate, and over time they become more cohesive as organizations. I think the other sort of, the counterpoint to make here is that I do think Trump changes this so much, right? Like it's harder to form a coherent anti-American alliance when it's Biden, because, you know, everyone has very different interests. And, you know, India, for instance, was in lots of ways quite close to the Biden administration. Yeah. And actually, one of the things that must make Modi so grumpy is that so much of the Biden strategic calculus was about bringing India on side in what they saw as a sort of confrontation with China. Geopolitical confrontation with China, and they did a really good job of it. And, you know, like, for instance, the oil thing, you know, Trump's having a go at India for buying Russian oil. That price cap that the G7 set up was very consciously designed so that India could buy Russian oil on the cheap. You know, the deal was, look, if India buys oil on the cheap, great for India, great for Indian manufacturing, helps companies like Apple move away from China to India, and bad for Russia because realistically you're not going to stop Russia from selling its oil, but they get a lower profit, basically. They get a lower price than they would on the open market. And then all of a sudden Trump comes in and goes, no, you're cheating. And Modi's going, guys, you set up the system exactly for this reason. Now you've changed your mind. And not only that, Trump comes in and says companies like Apple, which again, the Biden administration actively encouraged to offshore out of China into India. That's not enough now. You've got to come to America. Yeah. You know, what's Modi supposed to do here? Yeah. You know what I mean?
He's pushing him towards these guys.
Exactly. I mean, he's
bad influence. Yeah. He's fallen in with the wrong crowd.
It's also just, I mean, the Trump administration, some of the stuff that they've said, I mean, Peter Navarro was on doing the rounds the other day because he said something obscene. I mean, I think racist isn't even too strong. He said something like Brahmins, like the upper caste, are buying Russian oil at the expense of peasants or something like that. I mean, don't quote me precisely on that, but it was something along those lines. And that went down just about as well as you'd expect on, you know, I mean, India's a very online country, right? It went down just as much as well as you expect on sort of like the geopolitics and the Indian side of Twitter. And it's just, I don't think they understand that, like, Modi has a very nationalist base. You know, he is not going to be pushed around so explicitly by the Trump administration. It's just, he just can't do it. Like the politics, there's not the political space there. So yeah, and I think that if that's just sort of one of the countries, right? But my point here is that with Trump's assault on all of these countries, especially as he sort of turns on Putin, right? Trump is sufficient cause to unify them in lots of ways, right? Whereas before there were lots of sort of strategic diversions of interest. I think now that Trump just does unify basically non-Western countries like that, who I think some of them are sort of offended by Trump's specific assaults on their sovereignty, right? Like India has very specific complaints about Trump, as probably does Russia, as does China. But I think more generally, I think quite a lot of those countries are in some sense just committed to the basic norms of the sort of like modern world order, as it were. Especially free trade. I think you probably can't underestimate like how, especially like small countries in Southeast Asia, for instance, when Trump was imposing massive tariffs on, say, Cambodia, you know, that is an existential threat to the Cambodian economy. And those countries will see Trump as like their biggest threat, right? And that will unify them in action, I think. Well, then again,
at least good.
Exactly. That's what the sort of like counter-skeptic would say.
I'm keen to loop back to Putin though quickly, which is unbelievably where this began. Putin obviously bouncing up off the top of the board. Zelensky is currently in the lightly positive spot. Hasn't moved in a little while, but is obviously the other side of this coin. The reason that Putin went up this week is primarily the kind of geopolitical kind of optics of it all, him forging alliances, a little bit kind of Trump's waning interest helped too, as he said, but nothing explicitly to do with the war itself. So I'm curious, and I will allow you to make an additional move if you'd like to between the two of you. Wow. How is Zelensky doing on the other side of this? Is Zelensky actively losing here? Is Zelensky treading water and waiting for Trump to do something? What's the status of Zelensky, and should we move him?
I mean, what Zach said about the 50-day deadline, you know, there was a moment where when we saw Trump start to turn against Putin, you know, he was saying these things about, you know, massively hitting Russia and, you know, economically and sending bigger and bigger weapons to Ukraine. But that, again, he seems to have kind of got bored from that. And if he is saying, I'm going to take a step back, it's probably not great for Ukraine. Although maybe Zach can sort of explain this, but does Trump saying he's going to take a step back from trying to do peace negotiations in Ukraine, does that mean he's going to just keep arming Ukraine at the current rate, or he's just going to take a step back from the entire thing and wash his hands of it?
Well, I think what does seem you can rule out is an escalation in military support, right? Which I think probably puts Zelensky on the loser side of things. And that so far, most of Trump's Truth Social posts and sort of like interviews have suggested that the main way he imagines exerting further leverage on Russia is by escalating sanctions. And I think that his recent history suggests that will not be effective. I think the Russian economy has withstood sanctions remarkably well, but I just think the more fundamental issue here, right, is that for Trump to really, really strangle the Russian economy, you would basically have to stop China from trading with Russia. And Trump has talked about imposing these massive secondary sanctions on China, but I think we know he won't. Because actually, he has an ongoing negotiation with China as to their future trading relationship, but also in that trade war, right? A mini trade war after Liberation Day. We've talked this before. I think you should have read that trade war as the US losing that trade war, right? They did impose these massive trade restrictions on China, massive sanctions. China imposed their own set of massive tariffs and trade restrictions, especially like rare earths. And actually, I do think the US sort of caved, or at least the balance of power was pretty equal in that trade war. And so I just think that means that it's implausible when Trump says, I'm going to impose massive secondary sanctions and tariffs on China because they're buying Russian hydrocarbons. I just think that he's not going to do it. He probably cares more about the US-China relationship fundamentally than he does about saving Ukraine from Russia. And also, it was worth saying that neither Chinese nor the Russians think that's going to happen at all, which is why they just signed a new deal on the Power Siberia 2 pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. So Zelensky not doing particularly well, certainly seems to be losing the US more than people had hoped. Should we move him down to the neutral section from lightly positive?
Yeah, I think the longer we talk about it, the more I think he's probably moving down.
Okay, well, bonus loser of the week. Zelensky moving down from the lightly positive to the neutral section. Definitely the wrong way for him, but this has bounced back and forth over this podcast, over the previous iteration of this podcast. Him and Putin have been all over the board, and definitely on a downward trajectory right now, at least. To close, Rory, who is your winner this week?
So my winner of the week is South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, who has been in office for 3 months today. It's his anniversary, so that's big news for him, obviously. But my reason for moving him up is because he's generally doing pretty well. His approval rating has gone up for a few consecutive weeks now. It had dipped maybe like a month ago. But it's going up again, and it's in the 50s, so it's pretty good, especially when you compare that to his predecessor, who was just deeply, deeply unpopular. The thing that's sending his approval on the up again is his successful diplomacy. The big example of that is his meeting with Trump at the end of August, where there was a lot that could go wrong. People were worried it might be a bit like the Zelensky meeting, and people were saying, Lee might get the sort of Brazil treatment in that Trump might focus on the prosecution of the predecessor, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Yoon Suk-yeol in South Korea, but actually went really well. And Lee clearly charmed Trump. We've talked, so many episodes of this podcast are based on someone charming Trump. But there's a lot at stake for South Korea. Obviously a massive military partner of the US. The US has lots, thousands of troops stationed there. But Lee and Trump seem to be quite aligned on wanting better relations with North Korea. I think I'm quite skeptical about exactly where that goes, given how much Kim Jong-un was sort of enjoying hanging around with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. But they are at least, Lee and Trump are at least aligned on that. The things that could have caused awkward moments didn't really come up too much. Trump wants South Korea to pay more for the US military presence on the peninsula. That still has to be sorted out, but the fact that Trump didn't sit there going, you need to pay this many billions more. It's probably a good sign. But on the domestic front as well, things are going pretty well. He recently approved the yellow envelope law. Don't know exactly what's called that, but it expands sort of labour bargaining rights for workers, and that's something his entire career has basically been sort of pro-worker politician, because he sort of started out as a child labourer and worked his way up to where he is now. There's also another law that's enhancing minority shareholder rights, all these kind of things that you'd expect him to do, as given his background. So he's getting those domestic wins as well. And I think just the fact that he's not uber popular, but he's decently popular. And I think just the fact that it's steady going is a real good sign for his administration compared to the last one. And he, before he came into office, people were saying, he's a real populist. He can be quite disruptive in the things he says, but he's done a bit of a pragmatic turn before coming into office, and he has stuck with that has helped calm the waters a bit. And I think so far so good.
Interesting. Moving up then from the positive section to the top of the board, joining a illustrious line of people, a growing number of people too, I have to say. The top of the board used to be kind of hallowed, quiet ground, but these days there's quite a lot of people up there. Quite a lot of people with pluses. Well, maybe we need to fiddle that around soon. But moving to the top of the board, and also, as you mentioned, 3 months in, very quick that he has been rocketing up the board. To get that high that quickly is pretty impressive, really.
It's a bit of a classic, though. They win the election, get the double move up.
That's the game plan. I think Anthony Albanese did the same.
I was just thinking.
That is the
Mark
meta
Carney,
of this.
I think, basically did the same thing.
Absolutely.
We'll knock them down, don't worry about it. Okay, so to close, let's move to our ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week. Okay, so the way this works is each of us now get to cast a vote for who we think the ultimate winner and then the ultimate loser is this week, based on our conversations. And if we agree on the ultimate winner, or if we agree on the ultimate loser for that matter, that person then moves up or down an additional spot, but only if we reach a consensus. Now, we started this week with our ultimate losers, and we had Paetongtarn Shinawatra, we have Milei, and then we added Zelensky last minute. We are not going to include Paetongtarn Shinawatra in this because she feels like a bit of a shoo-in, considering she got fully axed, and considering she's not on the board anymore, we can't move her. So your options actually are Milei or Zelensky, which I think is actually a more difficult choice. I think consensus could prove tricky here. But we're going to start with you, Rory. Who are you putting down as your ultimate loser of the week?
I've chosen Milei. I was tempted by Zelensky, but I think because I was influenced by the fact that we didn't actually come in with him on our mind.
Sure.
And I think the Milei situation, Zach mentioned the polling maybe starting to turn against him. I'll go Milei.
Based on the reaction, I'm guessing we don't have consensus?
No, I mean, I'm very flattered that I convinced you, but I've gone for Zelensky because I think my thing was the polling is not quite bad enough for him yet, right? He's still doing pretty well. And again, I think there's a Trump analogy here, right? Trump's approval ratings aren't great, but Democrats are worse.
True. I have sided with Rory and with you earlier. I'm going for Milei. I think kind of agreeing with Rory there, that Zelensky being a last minute addition. Also, I feel like the Milei thing is like newer news. Things going increasingly badly for Ukraine is like an ongoing trajectory that doesn't feel as like timely as these latest scandals from Milei.
The thing I was convinced with Zelensky, though, is that I think things have been going badly for Ukraine for a while, but I think they were going badly because everyone thought Trump was buddying up to Putin. I think the thing that's bad now, right, is that Trump has fallen out with Putin and nothing's changed.
Yes.
Which means that, there's no good option. Like, either Trump likes Putin, bad for Zelensky, or he doesn't like Putin, in which case, not even really good for Zelensky.
Yeah, true. That's a
Should
good point. You'd have convinced me if that was 30 seconds ago. Okay, let's try again then for our ultimate.
Think of it then.
Ultimate winner of the week. You've got South Korea's Lee Jae-myung. You've obviously got Vladimir Putin, and you also have the audience suggestion of Lawrence Wong.
Why? Can someone in the audience explain why did you pick Lawrence Wong? It's just niche. You know what I mean?
It's very specific.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tiny country.
I guess people like adding people to the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess
Singapore's an interesting country, maybe not politically, but like makes more sense than picking some other totally out there countries. Okay, starting with you again, Rory. Who is your ultimate winner this week?
I've gone for Lee Jae-myung. I'm not even. I don't know who to go for anymore. But I think he. I think I'm just surprised at how smooth sailing it's been for him. I thought there were lots of things that could have gone wrong, but he's doing well.
Yeah. Zach?
Unfortunately,
Oh no!
I've gone for Vladdy.
Yeah.
Although I mean that's mainly because I just think those clips of him at the SCO getting to spout off about NATO and everyone sort of nodding sagely. I mean, that's a very good point, Mr. Putin. It's just crazy that we've come this far. The other thing is in Raw, I was nearly torn with the lead thing because I do think what's interesting about that is like lots of those politicians who come to power off the back of a very unpopular opposition, incumbent, they often have a very brief honeymoon. I mean, Starmer's not a bad example, right? But actually, the fact that he's doing pretty well, I think that's a bit of a shock. That bucks that trend.
Yeah, true. Okay, no agreement on either count, so no one's moving again, and the board stays exactly as it was about 5 minutes ago, which is exactly like this. As we said, we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time for more World League Leaderboard, but between now and then, a lot can change. A lot can change on the board, a lot can change off the board, and we will, of course, be discussing that in 2 weeks' time, alongside your audience suggestion for who you want adding or moving on the board. So let us know. Between now and then, there will still be some episodes of Starmageddon and editorial, so keep an eye on your podcast feeds or on YouTube if you're here, because there will be more from TLDR, and of course there'll be more across the whole TLDR network. There'll be so much more. We're just taking a couple of weeks off, and then we'll be back with... Actually, I've remembered another announcement, potentially. We might have 2 announcements.
Wow.
No one's watching at this point anyway.
2! See you then. And out at the table. I'm also going to move this one on top. It's the newer one. And then put that in the middle. I love that. It's a little bit aggressive.
Keep this
Perfect time of the
Definitely
episode
keep
to do
this
it
in.
halfway through.
Lovely. Love that. Hell. It's weird.
You're losing your mind, Jack. I mean, honestly.
I think it's because the title, the
angle
Brexit and
and
too
how
long.
f***ing, who cares?